I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit, so that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone. Dan Smolin from What's Your Work Fit. I hope you're having a good and successful week. We have a great show today. We'll get to that in a moment. I, as always, take this opportunity at the top of the show to thank all of you who have become part of the What's Your Work Fit community. This community has built organically. I haven't spent money with advertising and targeted social media. We've done this by having a conversation, by asking what makes work a wonderful part of a day doing other wonderful things. So, excuse me, I thank you all for joining us on the What's Your Work Fit group on LinkedIn. And also for those of you who watch us on YouTube, thank you so much for being a part of this experience. We couldn't do this show without you. It's a live show. It is driven a lot by the people in the audience who ask really great questions. So here's my ask. If you haven't done so already, please engage with What's Your Work Fit on our two platforms. We are on LinkedIn and on YouTube. You can follow us on LinkedIn with that by pressing that blue oval button with the plus. You can subscribe on YouTube by pressing that black oval button that says subscribe. Also, tell 5 friends to subscribe to What's Your Work Fit. That's how we built this community, by word of mouth. And really, that's how to do it. And so if you have 5 friends who you feel may benefit from the conversations that we are having, talking about problems and ways to overcome them, that's what we do on What's Your Work Fit. So send your 5 friends our way, and that's how we will build our community. One last thing I wanted to bring up, and that is we are now on Blue Sky. So if you are too, follow me. I'm at dansmolin.bsky.social. It's amazing how this platform has grown over the past 2 weeks. It's now at 20 million people and growing. It reminds me of the old Twitter, when people were still friendly and cordial and thanked one another for following them. We're making the most of this within the Future of Work community. And if you follow me and go to my profile page, you can also find a starter pack of really great Future of Work people who are already on Blue Sky, and you can follow them and engage with them at your leisure. Okay. I am so happy to introduce our returning guest today. She is Shelley Goldstein. Good morning, Shelley. How are you?
Good morning, Dan. I am really good. Thank you. Happy to be here for the 3rd time.
For the 3rd time, you're our returning champion. Thank you so much. Well, Shelley, we have a lot to talk about today, but you've got some exciting news, and that is the launch of your new book, which is called Remarkable Speaking, a framework to embody your voice and your vision. Would you tell our audience a little bit about Remarkable Speaking?
It is about speaking remarkably, because I do believe that when you embody your voice and your vision, you can then change the world. You could share your ideas. And so it was really important for me to share what that means and how to do that based on the feedback from my audiences and my clients, really embracing that and being able to leverage their voice and change things in their life. And the book is about the principles of what you need to do to speak remarkably, but also I provide real frameworks, meaning you can use them in real time, short, quick, and easy, not complicated, to actually put those principles into work the minute you finish a chapter. And that's my goal, to get you speaking your best voice.
I got to sample a little bit of the book, and it's terrific. And it's not a heavy lift. It's actually very actionable. And
Thank
I
you.
would recommend to the audience, do pick up a copy when it, we'll talk about where it's available in a moment. But sort of sip it like a fine wine. Take it in chapter at a time. Think about the value that's in each chapter. Don't blow through the book. It won't set in. Take it intentionally, take it steadily, and that's where the value will come in.
Well, it is actually set up almost like a workbook, if you will. There is an
Mhm,
accompanying workbook, but I do encourage exactly that. We learn new habits and behaviors incrementally. And the
mhm.
idea is to pick up a skill, pick up a drill, and really put it into work and really start identifying with that new behavior and new way of speaking and thinking before you move on to the next chapter. So, yes, in incremental steps, you actually achieve growth. That to me is the most important thing. Like you said, not just plowing through it. So, it's designed that way.
Now, beyond the book, I've known you as a world-class expert on public speaking, and that's how we've gotten to know you. You work with clients to gain the confidence that they need to become effective and captivating communicators in the workplace and in life. And
Yep.
having you on today was important because we've got an issue that's popping up now, that more people in the workplace are encountering, if you will, because they operate in team settings. They are no longer just one-on-one with a boss or one-on-one with a direct report. A lot of the work that happens now happens within the hive, within the team. And
Mm.
so now more of us are encountering team meetings. And thus, our question today comes from live show viewer Ruby. Good morning, Ruby. Ruby is a programming specialist at a B2B online events company. She
Mm.
loves her current assignment and the team lead running her group. But she says one of the biggest adjustments has been in being heard in important team meetings and gatherings. The team is about a dozen people and has a lot of big personalities, and they can sometimes suck the oxygen out of the room. Now, one other thing, Ruby's an introvert who has a lot of value to add, and yet she feels often overwhelmed by those big, booming voices. So, Ruby wants to know, Shelley,
Uh-huh.
how can I become heard on my team? Let's help her out here.
Ruby, what an interesting question. And I say interesting because whether we're speaking to one person or in a room of 10 or 100, how can I be heard? And
Mm,
I think what it comes down to is contribution. We feel, maybe most of us feel, I think, I know I could say this for myself, when my ideas are taken into consideration, I feel heard. And some of the ways to accomplish that from a leadership standpoint, ask questions, invite people into the conversation. But how do you do that as a participant?
mhm.
And some of it is exactly that. Ask questions of the group. Ask questions, or even something that is kind of wonderful when you're with the team, acknowledge somebody on the team. Bring light to their good work. And when you sort of pass the baton and put a colleague into the spotlight, it sort of shifts a little bit. It's not about you per se, it becomes about them. And that person might remember that and bring the conversation forward back to you. It is one way of feeling heard and participating.
Phil wrote this to me this morning. He like me is a reformed agency guy. And in the ad agency business, you got a lot of big personalities. And he
Oh,
said, the extroverts are often the loudest voices. They swing the car. But
yeah.
it's usually the introverts with the quieter voices that have the best ideas. And when I read that, I said, that's an opportunity waiting to happen. A really good intentional leader will step back before they enter the room and ask themselves, who are the quieter voices? Because I know they have some really good ideas. So, following on what Phil's saying here, Shelley, how do I walk into that team meeting as team leader with the bullet pointed, excuse me, intention of making sure that those softest voices, who are
Mm.
often so powerful, get their due?
Well, Adam Grant says, and I'm paraphrasing, the loudest person in the room isn't necessarily the smartest one or the leader. We don't know what people don't share.
Mm,
As a leader in that room, a great thing is paraphrasing and interjecting. And what I mean by that is you can stop somebody mid-sentence by holding, Dan, I loved what you said about this question of how do I become heard on the team and how do I do this in a work environment when somebody might be speaking over me. But I want to focus right now on Ruby's question we talked about earlier.
hmm
So what you're doing in there, what I just kind of demoed was paraphrasing somebody and acknowledging them to say, what you're saying is important, but let's shift the conversation over to Ruby because we haven't heard from her. And we believe she can add to this conversation. We'll come back to you, Dan, in a minute. So
Okay.
it's a little bit of flipping the tables, if you will, and paraphrasing. I mean, these techniques are used in negotiations, high stakes negotiations. You could certainly use them in a meeting like that. We don't
Mhm.
mind switching the conversation as long as we know you've heard us and you acknowledged us, and at some point we'll get back to you. And I think people learn to respect that idea.
Ellen asked she says this topic today begs the question, should we be training team members on how to engage? And it's not just the team lead. Should workplaces be investing set aside time to say, okay, we're not going to be talking about the budget roll-ups and the forecasts and the projections and how we're going to do all that. We're going to step back and talk about the process of what the rules of the road are, or what the politeness factors are going to be in the room, so that everybody knows how this is going to play. What do you think?
Interesting. Why not do both? I
Okay.
mean, my whole gig is, do it. Get out there and do it. So have a meeting about the budget, but
Mhm.
invite everybody in by having interactive sort of exercises that they can do where people can contribute to solving a solution. So everybody, let's say, sprints an idea. How do we
Mhm.
solve this problem, A? And you get the whole group that's in there to offer suggestions. And you have everybody sort of in the room participate in that. Doing that skill will cover both. You'll cover the budget
Mhm.
challenges or whatever the meeting agenda is. And at the same time, you'll go over those how-tos, if you will. Lead by example is my best way of putting that.
This is so interesting. I grew up in an era not with team leaders, but with a direct reporting relationship
Mhm.
with the people below me and the people above me. And when it's one-on-one, you don't have these kinds of things. Yes, we had status meetings. We had client meetings. But it seems to me that, especially in the client meetings, we let them talk because they were paying the bill. We knew better
Right.
than to interrupt them. But something happens when it's kind of generalized, if you will. And to borrow a word my mother uses often, we get spilkus. We get ants in the pants. I can't help myself. I got to say this.
Yeah.
I, 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 as a veteran in the workplace, I look at this and say, we can do much to improve the experiential value for our team members when we value their ability to be heard unimpeded.
Mhm.
And that's not saying they take over the microphone, but what that's saying is, I know Shelley cares deeply about this. I'm going to make sure that we get to her at this critical point in the conversation so she can own that value.
Yeah, well, great way to do that is when you start your meeting, open the floor up. And there's an exercise I do with my clients, and it's things I talk about in the book. It's I am statements. I am successful because I did this project.
Mm-hmm.
Having an exercise like that in the room about a coworker. My coworker is successful because at finishing the project on time because they took over and covered for Susie when they were not able to show up for the job. They had to leave for maternity leave.
Mm.
If everybody sort of in the group gets to write a statement like that about a colleague, somebody on the team who's done something to help the team or contribute, and then each person reads it out loud, that's a great way to start a meeting. We've sort of leveled it out because there are things we're going to learn about Susie and Jim and Joe and whatever that we didn't know before. And we're going to feel good because we've acknowledged that person, and it shifts the conversation a little bit. It brings up curiosity and things that we could take offline to find out more about that person or what they're doing. And when you're in a time of crisis, perhaps this is somebody you could reach out to. So it really helps build the work culture and dynamic of that working environment and sets a tone for the meeting, actually.
That's so interesting. But if you do it well, then you're also furthering the return on investment in your people and their lifetime value in your workplace.
That's right. That's right.
I bring this up a lot, Shelley, because, hey, I'm a ex-headhunter. I was invested in the longevity of my placements because what it said was if somebody is in a company 5 years or longer, that was a good hire. Wow, we've
Yeah.
gotten our investment out of it. Do you know where it often failed? When really good people felt unheard or
That's right.
unrecognized. And
That's
then they
right.
were hair on fire running for the exits.
Well, here's an interesting thing. Why do we have an exit interview as opposed to an interview while we, are working for you or not, during our tenure? When you're leaving, is it really important how you felt about something? You're gone. But if we know about it day 1, week 5, month 6, year 1, it really helps keep that conversation going. We understand how you feel. We learn things about the team that we didn't know, and that person feels heard. We can't necessarily, as an organization, implement everything everybody says. However, being heard and knowing that at least one's being acknowledged throughout their tenure, I think is really important. So those exit interviews really need to be check-ins regularly and often.
Right. What are you going to learn in an exit interview? You didn't do your job, a hiring manager. You've lost this person, perhaps. That's a terrible place to be in. And I agree with you. Check-ins are should happen regularly,
Yeah. And
serendipitously.
yeah, and they could even be done with this meeting idea of, sharing an I am statement at the beginning of a meeting for 5 minutes to do that collectively in the group. It doesn't necessarily have to be one on one. You're still checking in. But
Mm.
also, there are all these transferable skills we have.
Mhm.
Maybe, for me, I started as a costume designer. How are those skills translatable to what I'm doing now as a public speaking coach? Well, there's plenty. It was a lot about identifying with character,
Mhm.
giving that character in a show a voice, and the tool I used was clothing, but it was very important to the intrinsic values and the beliefs of that character. So when that curtain went up, you understood who was standing before you. Well, I do that now with clients, but with their voice as a tool. What's your intrinsic value? What are those skills you have that you can bring forward? Troubleshooting, analysis, being creative. Those things are what help us really stand out. And knowing those different transferable skills, how can I bring that into their current work role that might help advance them and actually advance in the company? Again, you mentioned earlier, the company invests in people as
Right.
much as the people invest in the organization. It's a win-win.
It indeed is a win-win, and I love I love that you brought up your early career chapter as a costume designer. This is close to my heart because my beloved Marcia, uh, thought she was gonna have a career around the dramatic arts on Broadway, perhaps even. And so
Mm,
costumes, that's probably how we ended up in vintage clothing. Everything's a costume. But the
that's
idea of a costume to me, am I looking around my team and am I seeing uniforms or different costumes? Now,
right.
why do I bring that up? Because if you've got uniforms, you've got an echo chamber. You may have people who are like minded, who are never going to question you or never going to question what's on the table. You may be lacking the 360 view of your problem because you may not have the right people in that meeting or perhaps on your team.
Mm,
So good on you, Shelley, for bringing that up, because if I'm a leader, it's not about proving myself right, the leader. It's about getting the job done properly. And, and this is so important, recognizing the contributions of the people in the room, of the people on the team, because it's not about me, it's we. We've changed that.
that's right. You can't do it alone. It's really taxing. And there's nothing wrong with having great ideas,
Right.
but bringing collaborative ideas to the table is really how innovation, trial and error 10x the opportunities. So it behooves a leader to get the collective input of people. And you lead by example. I kind of mentioned that early, by putting yourself out there, sharing your failures, your successes, and inviting others to bring those I failed because I succeeded learning moments to the conversation. So you let people know it's okay to go out there and experiment. We are going to fail, but the key is, how do we recover from that? It's how do we respond to that failure to succeed, is what life's all about. We're constantly learning.
I grew up in the direct marketing business as an agency executive. And the premise of the work was all about failing. We would put out what was called a control offer. Our client wanted to sell something, and the best offer that they made, the one that historically made the most money, earned the most ROI, was called the control. That's not germane to direct marketing. It's across business. And our mission was to beat the control and come up with alternative offers or distribution strategies or pricing strategies. And the meetings that we would have, both with clients and internal, where we're talking about the blow up failures. Nobody got upset. We celebrated that. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because we don't learn by success. We learn by
Mm.
failure, or at least we should.
And that's a really great idea, because do you hear me, but are you listening comes into that fold.
Oh,
When
let's get
people
into that.
Okay. When people fail, that's the time to ask questions. How did it happen? How did you get around that? What were the challenges going into it? What did you miss? When we share those ideas of the failing, we expand our ideas of where can we look for other solutions.
Right.
By understanding and sharing that, and also saying to the team, it's okay. We need this to grow. So it's the active listening and questioning people about those what could feel like a difficult conversation, which is actually something that's very beneficial to the end result.
When I read this in your table of contents, you hear me, but are you listening? It felt almost something out of exasperation sometimes, where and we've all heard this. Yeah, Shelley, I hear you. Sometimes that feels like a pushback, like you're putting up the zone of don't mess with me. But when I see the statement, you hear me, but are you listening? What it says to me is, I'm going to embolden myself. I may not be a brilliant, extroverted personality, but I'm going to stand up for what I believe in and what I think is right. And if somebody says to me, yeah, I hear you, Shelley, you now have agency to say, wait a minute. You say you hear me, but this is what I'm trying to impart. It's not my ego. I have the metrics to prove that this is in fact the case. And we're missing an opportunity if we don't go after this, because you know what? Our competitors are probably going to go after it. How do you help somebody who's not had the experience of gently pushing back, or maybe not gently pushing back, in a difficult group dynamic, to kind of own the moment?
Well, to begin with, if you're asked, do you hear me?
Yeah.
As opposed to I am listening, paraphrase again what that person has said. Oh, so what you really were talking about is this. Did I get that right? Do I understand you?
Right.
So the person who's acknowledging that, as opposed to, yeah, I'm listening, doing that little twist on asking the question, did I get that right, really reinforces you in fact heard that person. And you can lead with the next question. Okay, I got that. So how about we do this? If you're that person speaking, your best effort is to pause.
Yeah.
Reiterate your point. And you can say that I just want to reinforce this idea because it's really important that you paraphrase when you're responding to somebody. You can then turn the table and ask the person in the room who perhaps doesn't seem to be listening, or anybody in the room, and ask them a question related to what you just said, not in a condescending or challenging way that you're putting somebody on the spot, but from a point of view of, I'm really curious, and you can use that speaking prompt. I'm curious to know, Dan, your experience with this project X, Y, and Z. And then you're bringing, again, the key is bringing other people into the conversation,
right,
and something that I call the handoff. If that person pontificates or speaks way too much, interject with, I loved what you said. I want to keep the conversation on that area because it's really interesting. Let's bring it over to Helen and see what she can contribute. That's the magic, bringing everybody into the conversation. And the key is turning it over, turning the spotlight, if you will, to someone else in the room.
You made me laugh because you said turning it over to Helen. That's my late mother-in-law, and she was a psychotherapist.
Wow.
What she taught me was, don't make it about the person, make it about the idea.
Very
I'm
nice.
responding to what you've said.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest challenges for people who lead teams is getting beyond the personalities, getting beyond the quote unquote, the office sitcom or the Seinfeldisms, the person's a close talker, they're a loud talker, they're a near talker, whatever. And I can't deal with this person, but the challenge is to break down all those prejudices so that, I'm comfortable with hearing what Helen has to say, because I know Helen owns this thought leadership on this particular topic. And for really smart leaders, that's got to be liberating. On that thread, I want to bring up a comment that I got a couple of days ago. Brett's a guy who I knew living in my former community, which was near a Marine Corps base. And he was a captain in the Marine Corps, I believe. I don't know, it's a long time ago, but this is what he wrote me recently. He said, I'm a team lead of 12 in his current job. I'm also a combat veteran. And I remember how important it was to allow the quietest member of my platoon to be heard, because it made the team strong. If you're in a life and death situation and you are in a forward base and explosive devices are going on all around you, you need everybody paying attention. And I looked at that and I said, gosh, this is why military veterans are such good leaders. If they've been running platoons, if they've been doing the things to ensure the safety of their fellow people in combat, they're taking what was an existential experience and turning it into a powerful team leadership value in the workplace. What do you think of that?
It's a transferable skill. That is taking skills from all of our careers, all of our jobs. Maybe it's even leading a platoon or leader of the soccer team. You are taking those skills and you can easily transfer them into the workplace, because leadership is used in so many different places. These skills, we're not talking about hard skills of learning a language or Photoshop or something like that. These are skills that help build the character and the personality, that build your experiences. The thing I loved about that also is you can start a meeting. I mentioned sharing ideas about, calling out another colleague for something that they accomplished. Well, what about structuring your meeting so either a different person leads that meeting each week or a part of the meeting? So you could break a 20-minute meeting up into 4 parts, 5 minutes, and say pick 4 different people on the team to present a particular topic, and not necessarily always the department head. It could be somebody on the team in that department. So you hear those different voices and start those conversations. That's really important in keeping the flow of the meeting going, but also the people that would be silent. You're not calling them out as silent. You're just calling them out as potential leaders and people that do their job really well. So you're evening the playing field about what this intention is behind having different people speak up.
I spoke to somebody recently who's a team lead, and he makes a point of doing exactly that. He says, if I've got a 30-minute meeting or a 60-minute meeting, I'm the agenda setter. So I will lead with maybe 3 minutes of, this is where we left off. This is where we are now. And these are the 3 things that we need to basically talk about today. We're going to hear mostly from all of you or from some of you. I'm going to be sitting back and listening and contributing as need be. But in order to keep this meeting effective and talk about all the things that we need to talk about, I'm not going to be the focus of it. And I think that's very liberating.
It is. It is. And if you're nervous about speaking, does that take the pressure off of you having to do all the talking?
Right.
You're handing the mic over. The person's excited to contribute.
Right.
Especially when they're talking about things they know and have done on the job.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to take a little break as a speaker. It is liberating.
I agree. I want to get to Stu's question. Stuart Katz was a producer, an executive producer of video content within the healthcare industry broadly. And as part of his job, he also dealt with a lot of corporate team gatherings, if you will, especially around mergers and acquisitions and things like that. And he asked, can we talk about interpersonal communications in a merger acquisition environment when the corporate cultures of the combining organizations are entirely different? Yeah, that's a real thing. What do you think? Should be included in managing a merged room, if you will?
Who set the rules that this is the only way things have to be done? I have my professional voice or my corporate voice, and I have my weekend voice. Mm-hmm. It's your voice. And we have to use discretion, of course, but it's no different bringing everybody into the room with a question. So no matter who's in that room, somebody has failed at something. No matter who's in the room, somebody has brought something to the team. No matter who's in the room, everybody has shown up for one day and done their job. There is something to contribute. So again, the idea is let's remove these labels and even the playing field with questions that everybody can contribute to. Everybody has a chance to offer their idea or their experience with a story, a particular project you're working on or past client example. And then the conversation with these stories becomes more commonplace. And if there appeared hierarchies or different labels, introverts, extroverts, pull those out of the room and just speak human to human. Because at the end of the day, we all want to do a good job, I believe. We all care about what we do in helping people, and that's the best way to do it.
So going back a long, long time ago, probably to the late 80s, when I went through a pretty radical M&A process in the company that I worked with. I was with an agency that was a subsidiary of a big, big shop, but we were a bunch of pirates. We were freewheeling and fun and nutty and subversive. And the company that owned us merged us with a very white shoe, very corporatized marketing and communications consulting company where every one of the principals in the company came out of the Procter & Gamble executive training program and had pedigree. So you can imagine it was sort of like the dance scene from West Side Story where the Jets and the Sharks encounter each other for the first time. But this is what management did, and to this day, I think was so refreshing. The merger created a company of probably 150 people overnight.
Wow.
What they did is they gathered us all in a resort not too far from where our headquarters was based. And they randomized us, completely randomized us, let the computer do it. and broke us into core teams of 7 to 8 people. So we were either, I can't remember if we were all at different tables. We weren't allowed to interact with any other table but the circle. They were all round tables.
I like this.
What that did was, this is not about who's a VP and who here at the table is an administrative assistant. Your voices are all equal at this point. Let's learn from each other who we are, what we do, and also share with us something about the culture that you come from. We had a facilitator at each table. They gathered all the information, and that helped us to become one company and not the Jets and the Sharks.
I love that.
So ongoing, we were not necessarily working, you know, we had physical offices, but our offices may have been randomized so that I may have been next to, my office may have been in, you know, on either side of me may have been somebody from this other company that came in and merged with us. And so what happened is we got, you know, we'd go in with our coffee and we'd go, hey, Bob, good to see you. What's going on? And we would learn and we would become humans. And this is a long time ago, but it helped us to become one company. And also what came out of that was we figured out a brand name to call ourselves.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm loving, you know, the ideas that you're bringing here, but also what really smart companies can do, to Stu's point of encouraging 2 disparate brands with different ethoses to become one.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
Yeah. If you were to go into a room or that meeting,
Yeah.
and you asked everybody to write on a little Post-it note, what was one thing that terrified me about my very first day on a job?
Yeah.
My very first day on a job. And everybody wrote something down, and you put that Post-it on a giant whiteboard and you sat down. I could guarantee nobody would be able to pick out the VP, the newbie, the, you know, the underling. I mean, there's no way. We all shared those common experiences. We've all had a first something, first day on the job, first time riding a bike, first time, you know, going to school. There were so many firsts. And having that conversation again, eating the field, taking off those labels, people to people, the humanness you're talking about that
Right.
company brought out is really, you know, it's having your voice, that's speaking from yourself and being acknowledged for that, not for your title. Because anybody, or I should say not anybody, but think of how many people have your job title. It's
Yep.
what makes you unique at a podcast, being a podcaster, what makes
Right.
me unique as a public speaking coach.
So I want to round third here and get to a topic that you mentioned in the book, which is the meetings makeover. I think we've talked about some of these things today tangentially, but talk to us about what you intended to express with the meetings makeover and what you think the enduring value is to people, especially ones who have to operate together in a business team.
Well, the key, you know, look, there are lots of meetings,
Yeah.
and many of us don't necessarily like meetings. And there's statistics about we spend a lot of time and money in meetings, but yet they're essential for doing business.
Yeah.
There's no question. So how can we do them more effectively and efficiently, and perhaps fewer of them? And one exercise that I talk about is, if in 1 minute before that meeting, you could say, what is my big idea? What is my one big idea I want my group to know today? What's the message? Cite an example that supports that idea. And then wrap it up with What's the call to action? What do I want everybody to do as a result of me sharing this idea? And if you could say that in 1 minute, which many people could do in even 30 seconds, that clarity, that specificity will help you run an effective meeting, because you know what the goals and objectives are. It saves you time in beating around the bush as to what we're really going to do here today.
Mm-hmm.
You get to the point, you ask people to respond in the same way, your meetings can actually be shorter and fewer, and you could spend more time doing your work. That's one way of making over what could be a 30-minute meeting into a 10-minute meeting.
And brevity gets to recall. I don't have to remember so much, but if the points are boiled down succinctly, I will remember them.
Exactly right. And that also leaves an opportunity. You know, sometimes we get hung up in a meeting on one particular point because it's important, and that's fine. There's also an opportunity in a 10-minute meeting to say, here's what we can cover today. There's might be more things we need to address on this agenda. Please follow up with me. We'll take it offline for a second meeting. And that's where you could dive deeper into a situation or not take away from the initial intention of that particular meeting. Keep the flow, you know? And yes, it's another meeting, but it's a short, focused meeting on one particular idea or problem.
This has been such a fabulous discussion. I don't want it to end, but we've kind of run out of time here, Shelley. I thank you so much for being with us today. But before we depart, a couple of things. First off, where may our viewers and listeners find you on social media so that they can engage with you and perhaps maybe pick up a copy of your book or speak to you about something else?
That would be great. You know, a lot of this information, I have a lot of resources, and you can get on the list to be the first to know when the book launches, which is very soon. It would be remarkableframework.com. There, like I mentioned, you get a lot of resources in one sheets about some of the things we discussed today. You could be first to know about the book, and you can connect with me. I have lots of videos on YouTube. I do a lot of publications and discussions on LinkedIn. Remarkableframework.com will give you access to me in many, many, many platforms.
That's just wonderful. Now we get to the fun part. So you are now a third-time guest on our show. There's only been one other person who's been a third-time guest. So that, you know, you're working your way to the 5-time jacket like on SNL.
Awesome.
But in both those times, the first time we asked you the question about what's your work fit. And then the second time you were on, which was in October of last year of 2023, we asked you if anything had changed. So now we're going to have you look across the arc and tell us if anything has changed. So here from last year, October 2023, here you are relating to what's your work fit. Shelley, this has been a lot of fun. I'm going to pivot now to a question that you got to answer that I asked you back several months ago. I'm going to show you now the video in which you answered the question, what's your work fit? And for those who don't know how I describe it, what's your work fit means what attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes work a wonderful part of your day, doing many other wonderful and meaningful things, and not just the all-consuming time suck of a day. So here's Shelley's answer.
My work fit is speaking up and showing up, because when I share that idea of what's important to me about the work that I do, why I do it, I understand the people that align with me, that's the fit. I'm not here to convince somebody that they need something I have to offer. No, it's here's what I believe, here's what I've experienced. And if somebody aligns with that, they'll join and say, hey, I want to know more about it. And that's the conversation. That's the fit for me.
I love that. Has that changed at all, or is that still your work fit?
It's still my work fit. I mean, we started talking about that today. Conversation, just speaking up. That's how this started, and that's been the theme throughout.
Showing up. I think if I were to take I would add to that, showing up is really important to the humanness factor of work right now. Being present doesn't necessarily mean being in somebody's grill all the time, but it does mean being intentional. It does mean being a really good team player. And even from that list that I showed you, it's the listening skills. It's being empathic.
Raise your hand and ask the question. Be curious, engage. That's showing up.
So I just checked, Shelley. Your first answer was 2 years ago. So we've now had the through points of your journey along your work fit. Has it held up?
I believe so. I'm happy to say we talked about embodying your voice and your vision equally. Ask those questions, have the conversations, listen and be curious. It is the foundation of being able to be an effective communicator, but also know that you fit within this structure. Do these people align with my ideals? And not every workplace is right for you, as well as you're not right for every position. So how else better to find out than to have those conversations and ask those questions? Yes, year 3, I stand by those ideals.
You know, there's a reason why we've brought you here 3 times, and it aligns with this idea of work fit and the fact that so many people are struggling to achieve it. Apropos to nothing, earlier this month, Gallup posted the results of their tracking study of the workplace. And people are at a historic low of miserableness as pertains to the positive attributes that they should be feeling doing the work that they're doing. It's actually gone retrograde. You're part of our solution to get to a better workplace by learning how to be better humans and learning our own value at work and being able to speak up for it, but also being a really good advocate for the work you do and for the people around you who are doing it. So thank you, my friend, so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And I'm happy that I could be part of the solution and contribute to this conversation today.
Absolutely. I hope we can get you back a 4th time in 2025.
I want the jacket.
You want the jacket? Yeah, absolutely. Stick around, Shelley. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for a great season. We're going to see you in the spring of 2025. Until then, please engage with What's Your Work Fit and do reach out to me. I want to hear from you. Take care.